I want to bring in Tom White, senior options contributor and co-host of Fast Market, to help set up the action today. All right, let's talk broad strokes. One of the things you pointed out yesterday, Tom, was that, even though there were gains and it seems like the bulls were back, it wasn't across the board. So, like, for instance, you look at the sectors of the S&P 500. Yes, you had the leadership in information technology, communication services, and consumer discretionary, but there was some weakness. So what's your take when you look broad strokes across markets?
Yeah, good morning, Diane. I think, if you take a look at what's been going on in the overall market, we're just a couple percent off of those all-time highs. I believe the S&P 500 just about 1.5% below those all-time highs. And you take a look at the optimism in the overall equity market at this point. Everybody's waiting for that next piece of good news here. First, we've had earnings. Those have beaten expectations. The tariff talks have kind of cooled a little bit with China. That's been a positive. Government shutdown, longest in history. That hasn't been a positive, but now we're starting to get some better news on it. But if you take a look at some of the flows that we've seen, the NASDAQ was down over 3% last week. So not surprising they led yesterday on that big, massive. It was a more broad-based rally by the end of the day. Some more participants and more sectors started to take participate in that rally that we saw yesterday. But you see the gains that we saw, the snapback gains that we saw in Nvidia had its best day since April, up nearly 6%. Palantir was up over 8% yesterday. So the leaders in the market, and remember, we have that concentration risk in equities right now, and that's leaning towards communication services and information technology. Those were the leaders yesterday, and that kind of broadened out the rally by the end of the day. Getting a little bit of weakness here today, Diane, but nothing to really fret about. A lot of push into different asset classes yesterday, whether it was equities, especially led by tech. You saw gold rally to nearly 3-week highs. You saw Bitcoin stage a big rally, pulling back a little bit today. But it was risk-on mode yesterday, and we'll see what happens today.
Yeah, so that's a good point. We'll see what happens today, because to your point, we're closer to the all-time highs than further away from them. In terms of where things stand with the shutdown, now it feels like we finally have some closure, if you will. We know where things are going, and we know we'll start to get data again. What's your take overall when you look across this?
Not full closure yet, Diane. We don't have that. The vote yesterday, last night, passed the Senate. Funding the federal government through January to end this longest shutdown in U.S. history. Bill passed 60-40 vote, right? Most of the Republicans, except for Rand Paul, voted for it. But they had the addition of 8 additional Democratic or senators that voted for this. Now it's going to be heard by the House next, right? They're supposed to be called, according to Speaker Mike Johnson. They're called back by 4 p.m. on Wednesday. So we'll get a vote there, and then it goes to President Trump's desk. He's already come out with commentary that he's going to sign it when he gets it on his desk. But then there's, the guarantees that the Democrats wanted. Those are getting pushed to the side. You don't know what the vote's going to be like because there has been pushback from the Democrats on this bill. But this is good news for the equity market and good news to get through this government shutdown, start funding SNAP benefits, and start funding the government, and paychecks starting to roll out. Maybe this will help the airlines. Maybe that's going to take some time ahead of the Thanksgiving holiday. But this is definitely a benefit overall for the equity market. It just negates one headwind that we've had for equities at this point.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. At least it, I hear what you're saying about it's not full closure yet, so you don't count your ducks yet. But we're on our way. We're on that road to some certainty there. All right, let's talk about Nvidia. Shares are under some pressure this morning. It had gained some ground yesterday. You got this news of Softbank exiting its stake. What's your takeaway here?
Well, as a trader, Diane, I kind of like this, taking some profits when you can. We saw that big 5.8% pop in Nvidia yesterday, but they've sold their entire stake in the U.S. chipmaker, $5.83 billion. Remember, they've got this big partnership with OpenAI. They've got this massive investment in OpenAI. So this doesn't really negate the fact that that SoftBank's still working with NVIDIA at this point. They have those build-outs that they're doing here in the U.S., $500 billion worth of investments that they're making here in the U.S. So the ties aren't getting cut here. This is just probably diversification by SoftBank. They also sold a big chunk of their T-Mobile, according to them, to the company after their earnings, which were great earnings. Remember, this is the second time that they've sold a stake in Nvidia. They first invested in them in 2017, sold their stake in 2019. So this is probably just a measured approach to their investments and probably diversification at this point. This contributed to a big win on their earnings, also in SoftBank's earnings that they just reported. So this is, I think, maybe with the stock down a little bit, maybe investors are kind of a little bit concerned. Hey, one of their biggest investors is kind of getting out of their shares, but this is more of a diversification just due to the fact that they've already got these investment partnerships with NVIDIA at this point across the broad spectrum of AI.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The perspective, as you mentioned, from a trader perspective, taking some profits here, you take the win, and then looking for where else they can fund, because it looks like they still want to make some AI investments. Thank you, Tom. That is Tom White, Senior Options Contributor and co-host of Fast Market.